Have enough energy in our bodies that's the equivalent of a 30-ton atomic bomb.
Mitochondria are the powerhouse of your cell, and they're like little nuclear reactors. They take, ultimately you can, whatever you can get in your body, the energy potential against across every cell membrane in your body is about negative 70 millivolts, which doesn't sound impressive. But if you take negative 70 millivolts and you multiply that by, and the numbers change, 30 trillion, 10 trillion cells,
So I'm curious as to, what causes people's mitochondria to start acting faulty.
root cause of the root cause of the root cause actually is mitochondrial dysfunction. And so you can superficially talk about metabolic syndrome in the conventional medical world, get a little deeper and talk about some root cause with harmful toxins, chemicals, inflammation, food, gut microbiome. But ultimately, when you get to the bottom of that, mitochondrial dysfunction.
However, it's important for us to recognize that we have probably more control than we might think or we've been led to believe. Dr. Aaron Hartman, thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited for our conversation. This has been a long time in the making, perhaps long overdue, but I believe that everything happens with divine timing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for willing to shed your light on metabolic health and your expertise. I am so honored and so excited for what you're going to share today. We're going to unpack a lot of great information. You've got a very diverse background and you've got a lot of cool things that you're going to be sharing with us. But before we dive right into that, what I'd love to know is tell me more about the work that you do and tell me why it's important, especially right now.
Well, I'm a traditionally trained medical doctor, did all my usual stuff, went to medical school, joined the military, did all my kind of stuff, came back, started practice, was in a practice. At one point in time, we were seeing over 50,000 patients a year in a really busy practice.
Wow.
Um, but what happened is that my daughter that we adopted changed my trajectory because of her health issues. And that's I'm actually writing a book on that right now, just a whole different thing of interacting with the healthcare system when someone has a uncurable diagnosis. How does the healthcare system work with that? And so just running into that, I had to make decisions. Do I do the standard of care normal thing, which for her would result in multiple surgical procedures, lots of medications, or do I take a different path? And that has led me down working on 3 board certifications. I actually started a clinical research company and was over 70 different trials. It just took me down a really different pathway to ultimately to having a functional medicine practice that focuses on difficult cases. Basically, the people who've been to multiple doctors, seen multiple specialists, and told either there's nothing wrong with them, they can't be helped, or it's all in their head. And I kind of connect the dots to the mold illness or the hypermobility or the dysautonomia or whatever's going on in their bodies. The importance of that ultimately is, as we'll talk about with mitochondrial health, as we're getting deeper into science and we're getting more into like the dark arts, so to speak, of medicine, realizing that the root cause of the root cause of the root cause actually is mitochondrial dysfunction. And so you can superficially talk about metabolic syndrome in the conventional medical world, get a little deeper and talk about some root cause with harmful toxins, chemicals, inflammation, food, gut microbiome. But ultimately, when you get to the bottom of that, mitochondrial dysfunction is underneath all those things. And so it's really interesting how where you're at, whether it's conventional, functional, or in the deep stuff, right? That ultimately you have to have your vision, your eye on the ball of mitochondria in really tough cases. And sometimes these really tough cases, we're doing stuff that you wouldn't do just for a metabolic syndrome or just for a gut microbiome patient if you want to get their body to do what it was made to do, which is self-heal and self-repair. So
Well, thank you. And mitochondria as a buzzword, it's been a buzzword for many, many years, and we're hearing even more and more about it. For those listeners that are new to that term, or maybe they've heard it before but never really got a kind of a working definition of what the mitochondria is, I'd love for you to elaborate on what are the mitochondria and what exactly is their role in just health and wellness.
I mean, ultimately, the mitochondria are the powerhouse of your cell, and they're like little nuclear reactors. They take, ultimately, you can whatever you can get in your body, food, drink, gets digested, gets broken down into basic parts, and your body ultimately turns these into electrons, which is kind of like hydrogen, basically hydrogen, which is fusion, right? You take hydrogen, put it together, you make H2. That's what the sun does. So actually, your mitochondria, in a way, are kind of doing like what the sun does. They take H2 with oxygen, make water, and you create energy. So that's what they are. And they're really interesting because they're in every cell in your body, every cell, well, except for red blood cells. Sorry, they don't have mitochondria, but um, and they're super important because they make energy. And without appropriate function, your body actually can't do It's basic stuff. So ultimately, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells. They're like little fission reactors that take stuff and turn it to proton to hydrogen atoms, which ultimately creates energy in our body.
I heard something once, and maybe you can verify this or we can look it up later, but I heard that we have enough energy in our bodies that's the equivalent of a 30-ton atomic bomb. Is that accurate? Maybe give or take a
Um,
few tons?
I mean, that is actually true, give or take a couple kilotons or whatever. The energy potential against across every cell membrane in your body is about negative 70 millivolts, which doesn't sound impressive. But then you take negative 70 millivolts and you multiply that by, and the numbers change, 30 trillion, 10 trillion cells, all of a sudden you have a ton of energy, you have joules of energy, which is actually, that's how we measure lightning strikes, is in joules of energy. So it is this amazing thing, and your body does a slow burn. It's again, it's like this nuclear reactor kind of thing where it gives off heat. Heat's a byproduct of creating energy. You create CO2 gas, but you actually do create energy in the mitochondria. It's just the energy, it's crazy. And that's where you get in some different things with healing practices and the ability of your body to self-heal and self-repair. Can you actually, through use of your central nervous system, and this is where some meditative kind of practices come to play, change the energetics of your body, or use external products like pulse electromagnetic field therapy, hyperbaric, to actually change these energy potentials in your cells to get your body to heal. One of the things that's interesting about that whole mitochondrial thing is if your mitochondria are just 10% inefficient in productivity, your body makes something like 20 to 30 times its weight a day in ATP. Well, if you're functioning 10% under the radar, that has a massive impact on energy production in your body. So you hear these big numbers, but ultimately a small difference in your energy, your ability to produce energy can over time lead to premature aging, breakdown of organ systems, and a lot of dysfunction in your body.
I want to make sure I heard that correctly and our listeners heard that correctly. Did you say we make 20 to 30 times our body weight in ATP every day?
Yes, your body replicates, one of the things your body does is recycle.
Mm-hmm.
You recycle ATP. ATP gets turned into ADP. Sometimes it can turn into AMP. And that's the whole purpose of this whole electron transport chain is to take foodstuffs like glucose, turn it into NAD, FAD, which then ultimately, and protons, which ultimately go down your mitochondria, go through this thing called a proton pump, which basically puts on these phosphates onto ADP to turn to ATP. That thing goes around your body, releases a phosphate group, used for energy, used for making stuff, and then goes back around and gets recycled. Your body is doing this all the time. Vitamin C, as you may know, is another one of these things where humans don't make it, but you can recycle it. And if you're an amazing recycler, you can get by with maybe 100 milligrams a day of vitamin C. If you're a horrible recycler, you might need a gram of vitamin C a day. And this applies to the folic acid with MTHFR gene mutation, B12 vitamins. One of the things that as humans we're supposed to be good at is recycling raw materials. And if you have a metabolic dysfunction and you don't recycle NAD, which is important for energy production, FAD, you don't recycle your B vitamins and the methylation pathway, all of a sudden you're affecting energy production. Ultimately, the end product is AMP, ADP, ATP, but it's a complex network. It's this ridiculously, infinitely complex thing that we're learning more and more about on a year-to-year basis.
One thing that I find fascinating, thank you for sharing that. One thing I find fascinating is that we also produce light, right? So CO2, water, and then I believe our mitochondria give off light as another form of energy. And we can see that if we look at somebody through an infrared camera. So with the right filters, we can also see the other forms of energy that our body gives off. It's quite remarkable that when you think about it, how amazing this entire process is happening inside of us, kind of silently, whether we're grateful for it or not. It's happening inside of us, inside of our loved ones, and now we have the science and the awareness to kind of tap into it and not only kind of understand what's happening, but also manipulate it in a way that serves us. So I'm curious as to what causes people's mitochondria to start acting faulty.
Well, mitochondrial dysfunction ultimately is one of the root causes of metabolic disease. And so there's a whole bunch of different factors can lead to that. One is nutrient deficiencies. So you need you need NAD, which is vitamin B3, a different form of that for complex 1. Complex 2, you need riboflavin. Cytochrome C is one of actually when you're mentioning, it's actually this electron transport T molecule that actually absorbs light. And actually, this is where light can actually affect the efficacy of mitochondria. You've got ubiquinone, or also known as coenzyme Q10, which transfers, and your body, another thing your body recycles as you get older, typically about when you're 50, you don't recycle it as well. And every adult usually needs about 100 milligrams at 50 of a supplement because you don't recycle it as well. Your membranes are actually made of phospholipids, and the mitochondria, especially Pi and Pe, which are unique in that they're in the mitochondria, so also in lipid medicine and fats, these basic nutrients you need for function. Well, 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium, depending on what research you look at. 90 to maybe 100% of Americans are deficient in potassium. According to the US RDA, 40 to 60% of Americans are deficient in a single B vitamin. All of a sudden, nutrient deficiencies are kind of sort of everywhere. Inflammation affects it, which all of a sudden, that's where food comes into play. Toxins and chemicals, because of the way chemicals and toxins work, they actually bind to these cell membranes and impact everything that occurs across cell membranes. And then the interesting thing is like how actually your gut microbiome, we're learning about all these little signaling molecules and short chain fatty acids and all this kind of stuff that the microbiome make that actually help program and stimulate your mitochondria. So all of a sudden now, all these things can play into dysfunction in your mitochondria, and basic things like real food, healthy fats, appropriate rest, things like HIIT, exercise, meditative practices. We're learning about how all those things impact that whole process that ultimately play into mitochondrial health. And just to correct one thing, I think I was talking a little bit. As I'm thinking here, the number I think is 8 to 10. I think it's 8 to 10 times, not 80 to 10 times. Your body makes that much in weight of ATP a day. So let me just fix that, because as I was thinking, I think it's actually, I think it was pictures popping in my head, 8 to 10, not 80. So I'm just gonna
Okay.
fix that number right there.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to, I guess, regardless, that's a pretty remarkable number.
Regardless, it's a bunch,
Yeah.
and you have to recycle it really well. If you don't recycle it well, it impacts everything.
So, how would somebody know? Like, what are the first or early signs of mitochondrial dysfunction?
Well, that's where you get into traditional medicine and metabolic syndrome. So you'll see organ system dysfunction. You might see issues with these things called plasmalogens, which are little organelles in your body that make fatty acids. And that can show up as high triglycerides and low HDL. You might have issues with metabolism of uric acid, which is one of the important things that your body does. You see that in gout, for example, when it's really high. So you might see an elevated uric acid level in your blood. If you have endothelial dysfunction, which is the 60 plus thousand miles of all the arteries and arterioles in your body, inflammation there, you can sometimes pick up as a elevated HS-CRP. So all of a sudden, you can start doing some labs and saying, hey, do you have dysfunction in arterioles? Do you have dysfunction in the organelle I mentioned before? People with PCOS, it's interesting how that is actually part of insulin resistance syndrome. And people with insulin resistance, that is a dysfunction in the insulin receptor that ultimately comes down to energy production. So there's a whole host of diseases that fit into metabolic syndrome that are basically hints. You're diabetic, you have high blood pressure, you had preeclampsia during pregnancy, you have gout, you have sleep apnea, you have low testosterone, you have PCOS. Metabolic syndrome, you likely have, I'm going to say you do have mitochondrial dysfunction, and you can do lab testing that kind of bridges that, the theoretical with the diagnosis.
Okay. And then how about things like brain fog? We're seeing that more and more. How much does mitochondrial function play into brain fog?
Well, I mean, you know, mitochondria have different concentrations in different parts of your body. Super concentrated in your liver, it's like fatty liver disease, detoxification, super concentrated in your brain, in your heart, your muscles. And so you'll see things with, long COVID illnesses, mold related illnesses. If you were like a first responder to 9/11, you were in the first Gulf War, you'll see brain fog, you'll see muscle aches and pains, you'll see you'll see exertional dyspnea or shortness of breath, or post-exertional fatigue. You do something hard and you're tired for 3 or 4 days later. These things that fall into like the chronic fatigue, fibro, Lyme, mold world. These are all manifestations, symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction from different causes. But those things I just mentioned now, that's like all I do in my clinic every day is these kind of illnesses. So those are the kind of the superficial things you can think about. Neurological issues, brain fog, memory issues, cognition, poor sleep, body pains, as far as like fibromyalgia stuff. And then when you work out, you stress yourself, you have these aches and pains that take a while to recoup, and then the post-exertional fatigue. Those are all superficial symptoms of this underlying metabolic mitochondrial dysfunction.
And my understanding is that our mitochondrial DNA comes from our mother's side. So
Yeah.
our moms, our grandmothers, great grandmothers, like there's a lineage there. Can you talk about that a little bit? And if that plays any significance, like in terms of evaluating family history or looking at the mother side of the family more closely to see if something should be done or
Well,
corrected?
this is an interesting topic, and I'm gonna say it's a little controversial, so to speak. No, 100% true. The mitochondria do come from mom. They do pass down women, but that's where also epigenetics comes into play.
Mm,
The interesting thing as well is that the placental DNA actually comes from your father. So yes, your genes are for the mitochondria are coming from your mom, but the placenta that houses you and actually makes stem cells and makes peptides and all these kind of things that actually make a healthy environment for you are actually coming from your father. But you will see certain illnesses, predispositions familiarly because of this. But this whole idea of transgenerational epigenetic priming, which is a fancy way of saying generation to generation, the environment can change gene expression for these mitochondria being passed down. So we saw this in the Dutch bread famine in Mao's China in the 1950s, where in the bread thing in Dutch was in the World War II, and Mao's China was in the 50s, where you had middle class women in those areas that got pregnant, but had the lack of food. They were pregnant, and when your mom was, when you were inside, this is crazy, Sachin, you were a egg inside of your mom when your mom was inside your grandmother
right.
when she was pregnant. And all of a sudden, that environment primed the daughters for austerity. And if they grew up in a poor environment, went back to poor environment, no, they had normal longevity, no issues. But if they actually came from middle class, upper class, and went back to caloric excesses, they then have increased incidence of diabetes and metabolic diseases. So we're seeing how there's actually is this transgenerational epigenetic thing where, yes, you're passing these down. There can be predispositions, but the environment actually is playing a bigger role in that than genes per se. I mean, you have to have the genes, but the saying is the the genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. And that's like this beauty of the complexity of like how environmental stressors, environmental changes, climate changes, your body's ability to adapt to different parts in the world. It's amazing. Humans are the only creature in the world that can live anywhere in the world. And part of this, I believe, is this ability of our gene expression to change because of our environment.
Yeah, and it puts some power back in our hands. We're not
Yeah.
necessarily, at the mercy of our genetics, so to speak. However, it's important for us to recognize that we have probably more control than we might think or we've been led to believe. And speaking of living anywhere in the world, I've been following a lot of Jack Kruse's work. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's a neurosurgeon and he's really big on mitochondrial health. He calls himself a mitochondriac. And a big thing that he focuses on is the importance of light, especially sunlight, and how light really primes our body and our mitochondrial health. And you talked about how light plays an influence in mitochondrial function. And his big thing is living in the right part of the world. While we can live anywhere, I live in Canada, and I know you live in Virginia. So, certainly I'm a fish out of water from an environment standpoint. My skin color doesn't match necessarily where I live. And certainly I'd love to move closer to the equator because I enjoy the sun, especially as I get older, I'm enjoying it more and more. But I'm curious as to if you had somebody who had mitochondrial dysfunction, would you ever encourage them to move like to a different region of the world where they're getting more sun naturally or they're able to be outside more, which can help improve their overall health?
That's a really interesting topic to discuss. Encouraging people to move, those are big life changes and big things. That's a little bit outside of my expertise to that's family and stuff. But you are 100% correct in that the striking of your skin by photons has a positive impact on your body's ability to make energy. And you actually have these things called chromophores, which are you may have heard about the cytochrome P450 system, which is enzymes in your liver that drugs get through and all kind of stuff. That P450 correlates to the wavelength absorbed by cytochrome P450. It's 450 nanometers. And so cytochrome C absorbs light at a different intensity. We have these things throughout our body, and light does actually affect. there's a couple things that affect our body's energetics. One is light. The other one is the Earth's electromagnetic fields.
Mm.
If you look at how much energy your body makes, if you remove the sunlight and you remove the Earth's electromagnetic fields from it, our body can't make enough energy for health. And so it's really interesting. Like those two things that we don't think about that are external actually do impact our body's ability to make energy. And so, and then you get in these little nuances. And I just finished reading this interesting book about 6 months ago called The Fourth Phase of Water. And it talks about how light hitting your skin, and the light will absorb anywhere from go anywhere from 2 to 4 centimeters in your body based on the density of tissues and skull versus abdomen. But it changes water structure, which 99.9% of your body by molecular number is water. And then water takes on this crystalline substance, and you get this thing called an exclusion zone. And basically, water flows through your body better. So you actually get better, less viscosity, better circulation of blood when light hits your skin. So all of a sudden now light is having so many impacts, not just mitochondrial energy, which is true, which is they have these really cool devices using LED light for brain trauma patients, which I use with my daughter and other patients, using LED lights for wound healing, a bunch of cool things. But it's also impacting water, which is, literally the universal solvent. And so I think when you talk about things like that, it's a big world. I'm not going to tell someone to move, but getting outside in the sun, like I personally know how much, like we're in Florida right now, we're in Virginia, and like just getting here, it's like, wow. My kids are like, oh
Mm.
my gosh, they love this. They notice the difference of how they feel just by being outside for 20 minutes. And it's having them, and then you go outside and you touch the earth ground. There's this whole idea of the electrons transferring from the earth to us. And so the world's infinitely complex, our body's infinitely complex. And the more and more you learn about, you're like, I'm in awe by like, wow, I've still more to learn. But yeah, light's a big deal. You can get light different ways, whether it's technologies, LED light boxes. There's a whole bunch of ways you do. But the thing I tell people is, if you go out in the sun, typically it's about 100,000 lumen of light versus a really super fancy box might be 10,000 lumen. I'm sorry, lux of light. So ultimately, nothing's as strong as the sun.
Yeah, the sun, it's been worshipped by many cultures for thousands and thousands of years. And I think for the last like 50 years, we vilified it. And, people have been avoiding it or shielding themselves from it. And I feel like the pendulum's swinging the other way now because we're starting to realize how, respectfully utilizing any modality can be. And certainly this day and age, we're not getting, at least from what I can tell, most people are not getting enough sunlight. Even people who live in warm climates. I just spoke with a client in Scottsdale, and sometimes it's too hot to go outside, right? And so they stay indoors, even though their exposure to the sun could be quite magnificent. So I think it's important for us to find a responsible way of engaging with the sun and making sure that we're getting some. I know that morning sunlight is very crucial for our circadian rhythm, and that plays a role in kind of activating our organs and our systems and production of melatonin, which is one of our most potent antioxidants. This is I love this conversation. You're such a breadth of knowledge, and I can tell that you've studied this in quite in depth, and I can see why you get such great results with your clients. So thank you for enlightening us. I'd like to maybe switch gears. We did talk about the liver a little bit with the P450 pathways, and I know toxins are a big part of what you do. You mentioned a little bit of that. What are some of the common toxins that impact our metabolic health, energy levels, cause disease and dysfunction in our body? What are some common ones? And then perhaps what are some uncommon ones that people don't necessarily think about too much?
So I'm gonna break them down to two major groups: heavy metals and petroleum-based products. Um, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a second. So heavy metals, if you look at the US ATSDR, which is it's a part of the EPA, it looks for toxins in the environment. Arsenic is still the number one environmental heavy metal that they're worried about. And we used that for decades. It wasn't until 2012 that actually a lot of the poultry industry voluntarily removed it from chicken feed. People just don't realize that it was used to, mercurial arsenates were used as a fungicide um, in apple orchards in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So these things, lead in the gas, lead in the paint. If you were born before 1990, you have lead in your bones.
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden, environmental heavy metals are kind of sort of everywhere. And just because it's like a normal level, people think, oh, I'm okay. But what I tell people is like the EPA level for lead levels in your blood that was toxic In the 1960s was 50. In the 80s, it went down to 20. Maybe in the 90s, it went to 10. And recently, the last couple of years, they said anything more than 5 is associated with loss of IQ in kids. Well, now we know anything over 1 is associated with loss of IQ. So it's like there's no safe metal level of lead. Mercury, which, how many people are eating sushi and eating fish? I mean, it's a lot of mercury. I've had multiple patients who've gone on these sushi kicks and got heavy metal exposure. So it's something that people don't talk about quite as much, that is still everywhere. The second group, petroleum distillates. And you're like, well, petroleum. I'm thinking, well, a lot of these artificial dyes, red dye number 3, as of this recording, was recently banned by the FDA, right? And that's like, um, that is a petroleum distillate. A lot of our colorings we use in foods are actually petroleum distillates. If you think about, hard oils or hydrogenated fats, taking corn oil and turning it into margarine,
Mm.
taking a vegetable oil and turning it into Crisco, these fats actually get stuck in our cell membranes. Mitochondria, the complexes are in the cell membrane. And if you take a viscous liquid, like olive oil, let's say, you make it solid, it impacts actually your cells vibrate. And if you impact that vibration, it's impacting the actual function of the um the receptors, hormone receptors and membrane receptors. And all of a sudden, these fats, not just in our diets, but also petroleum distillates, are everywhere. Plastics, nanoplastics. I mean, you know, um, I've seen patients dealing with this thing called aerotoxic syndrome, who are individuals that are airline stewardess and pilots. They get exposed to lots of diesel fuel. So looking at, heavy metals and then petroleum distillates, those are two massive things that can impact your energy. And that's not even talking about glyphosate and pesticides and going down that pathway. And we get exposed to this stuff. Like the biggest exposure, if you're not living near some factory or some, is typically through our food.
Mm.
And that's where food, all of a sudden, like eating real food, is a big deal because it helps you get rid of these things. And just getting your kidneys to work better, getting your liver to work better. It's amazing how I've had difficulty getting metals out of patients. And just by giving them minerals, potassium, magnesium citrate, um, bicarb to improve kidney function, has had a massive impact on their ability to get metals out of their body. And so, anyway, those are some topics we can dive into those. But the concept of the environment and chemicals and toxins affecting our health is still a big. It's a massive issue.
It seems like it's just part of everything and everywhere. Are there ways to, aside from making better and more conscious choices, are there other ways that we can protect ourselves, like taking binders on a daily basis, or maybe being aware of where these things might be found? What are some ways that perhaps maybe you can share? What are ways that you protect yourself from being exposed to these things?
Well, I mean, think your body makes toxins. See, carbon dioxide is a toxin in your body, and you breathe it out. Uric acid in your urine. That's a metabolic waste product of protein metabolism. When you poop, you're actually, the bile your body kicks out to your liver. You're taking fat soluble toxins from your cells, making them water soluble and discharging them. Sweating. There are certain things your body only excretes through your skin, and so the first thing to realize is your body was made to detoxify because your body makes stuff. So, okay, cool, got that concept. Let's avoid excessive amounts of toxins, which is environment and foods and clean home and mold and all that kind of stuff. But then it's like, how can you actually help your body detoxify better? I get a lot. There's a book, the textbook of environmental medicine, that was written by Dr. Walter Kuhnian, who is a world-renowned detox guy in Texas. He passed away a few years ago. And it's interesting, some of the things he was doing. He was working with, people working on in oil wells. He saw people that actually had issues with the 9/11 first responders, people that had, police officers breaking down crystal meth labs who get exposed to lots of stuff. And he worked on nutritional stuff, getting your B vitamins, getting healthy fats. Lipid therapy is just phosphatidylcholine, omega-3s, omega-6s that basically become the soap to wash your cells out, the right nutrients, but then helping your body do what it does better. You're drinking lots of clean water, that if it's not, mineral water, you can just, you can put some minerals on it. You can, alkalizing your urine improves your kidney's ability to be able to detoxify. Sweating. We were made to sweat. I have people who've not, in Canada, I mean, you probably have patients or clients who haven't sweat in years, using a sauna and sweat. Breath work. It's one of the interesting things when you do breath work. Not only does it improve oxygenation, improve CO2 extrusion, but also massages your vagal nerve when you take deep breaths. And then when you're pooping, like that's where binders come into play. Unfortunately, the way you're, or fortunately, I mean, it's made this way. So, but the whole intrahepatic circulation, you your liver filters, you dump it into your upper small bowel that goes into your large bowel. But you absorb about 95% of that bile back in your system for this whole circulation thing. And binders kind of come in there, bind it, and get it out to actually make that system work better. And so this is where fiber is nature's binder. It's really interesting how after a long winter, when typically people would eat in our part of the world, eat more animal products, what does nature give to us in the spring? Microgreens.
Mm.
All of a sudden it gives us these things to help us detox all the stuff in the winter time. It's interesting how these things kind of work together. But I just focus on, decrease what you're exposed to, improve what your body does, give it what's deficient in, and see how you do. And for many people, that's really all you need to do.
One of the things that, speaking of petroleum-based products, is clothing. And so there's been a lot of attention that's been drawn to, yoga clothing and clothes made out of polyester and, you know, essentially petroleum byproducts. Any commentary on that? I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that.
It's I try to major on the major and minor on the minors. I'm gonna take a little detour here. When I first started doing functional medicine, I started doing organic acid testing, and I saw I had high levels of styrene in my body. I'm like, styrene, that's what happens when you burn like plastic or we're like off gassing of plasticizers. Like, how am I getting styrene? And I started just thinking, retested it, did this, did I could never like I'm not chewing on plastic and swallowing. And it was like the end of a really hot Richmond summer. And I was just kind of, thinking about things, got in my car one day and I took a breath in and like I smelled like it just hit me. My car's off gassing plastic.
Mm.
When I get in my car, like you get in your car and it's hot all summer long and you get that smell, that new car smell, that's you're inhaling plasticizers have been off gassed. And so all of a sudden it's like, okay, major on the major, minor on the minors. Yes, wherever people are at, but it's like you gotta eat real food. But decreasing exposure, like when you first get in your car, you open the windows to get all that off gas stuff out. Air quality. Do you have a HEPA filter? Are houses particularized? Do you have carpet in your house? There's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. The three big sources of that in people's homes. Number one, smoking. Number two is burning incense. And number three is carpet. So all of a sudden, like, big things like, do you have carpet in your house? Yeah, I'm gonna wear clean clothes. Yeah, I don't want to have plastic on me. I mean, ultimately, you have to. My computer's plastic. I'm sure I've got plastic underwear or whatever. But there's so many other things that are, I think, bigger players like your car off gassing.
Mm.
Carpet in your house. Again, the number third exposure of PAHs to people is carpet.
Mm. Yeah, carpet definitely has a smell to it. Like when you walk into a carpet store, it kind of hits you in the face, especially now because they're using a lot of synthetic materials, right, that are stain proof and all that kind of stuff. So, great point. And another reason to buy a used car instead of a brand new one, perhaps, right? Like let somebody else go through the off gassing process. But even still, like on a hot summer day, those plastics are going to be off gassing. So great suggestion to just kind of roll the windows down, let the fresh air in, let that off gas, get out of the car and preserve the health of yourself and your family as well.
And this is also where, like fats, we've been told to do low fat in our diets since the late 70s. And like dissolves like. That's just basic organic chemistry. And in order for our bodies to detoxify fats, one of the best ways to detoxify fats is healthy fats. Olive oil, avocado oil, omega-3s, omega-6s, healthy sources of phosphatidylcholine. And with some of my really super sick mold patients, one of the first things we do is lipid therapy, which is using healthy fats as a kind of soap, basically, that goes through the body and starts cleaning out their cell walls. And that's, phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylethylamine, phosphatidylnositol, which is found in lecithin, choline, and just consuming those, it's amazing to see how people, their brains will function better, they'll feel better. So healthy fats, and when you look at how much processed oils, seed oils, rancid fats in our food system, it's like I'm just surprised we made it this long. To be honest with you, it's just amazing, knowing how important healthy fat is and how bad, you know, basically partially plasticized. This is the deal. It's like you take your vegetable oil, you turn to margarine, that's partially plasticized. It's literally partially plastic oil, just like my computer. And you're going to eat that, and it's going to get stuck in your cell membranes, you know.
Yeah, it's shocking to me, to your point. I always wonder the same thing is like knowing all the things that you know and I know and others in our space know. It's amazing we've made it this far and are still like, still somewhat functioning, right? Like still able to go about our daily duties. And maybe we don't have as much energy as we should and don't have the pep in our step that we should, but somehow we're still functioning. Now, if we were cars, we'd be broken down jalopies on the side of the road and barely functioning. So our bodies are so resilient, which is kind of a gift and a curse, right? Because if you put the wrong fuel in your car, you would know pretty quickly. However, you could put the wrong fuel and create the wrong environment in your body, and it might take you decades to understand that what you're doing is detrimental to you. However, it sounds like, from my experience and your experience, it doesn't take long for the body to turn around and it's very receptive to the right inputs. So that's the good news, is that no matter how long we've been suffering or struggling or how many people we've seen, once we provide the right environment and the right nutrients and the right mindset and all the other things that we were talking about, the body can make a rapid turnaround for the better.
It's almost as if your body wants to heal and repair.
Hmm.
And if you just remove what's blocking that process, the roadblocks I call them, and give your body what's lacking, it just wants to get better. Now, obviously, when you're 80, the that that ability to do that's not as strong as when you're 20, but it's amazing like how much your body wants to heal and wants to get better. And that's one of the things with all the educational things I put out there is like, 80% is people can do on their own if they have the right tools, the right things that are out there. Obviously, you need a guide because it's, when you say real food, people's eyes glaze over when you start talking about, oh, I got healthy organic, canola oil and soy oil. And like, okay, it's like an educational process, but it's really and to your point about the whole our bodies, it's a difference between complexity and complicated. The space shuttle is a complicated machine, but one tile that's frozen the wrong day, whole thing blows up. Versus your bodies, there's so much built-in redundancy.
Mm.
It's really this mysterious thing where you lack this, your body will make it. I mean, if you lack this, your body will make it. You don't synthesize this, your body will figure out a way to make it, or you'll extract more of it from food. You got too much of this, your body actually won't extract from food, and you'll poop it out. Your body will make B12 if you're a kid who lives on one of the Polynesian island that has thiamine deficiency. Your body actually you'll grow bacteria in your gut to make some thiamine for yourself. It's just like you can't some of the stuff you just can't make it up like what your body does,
Mm. That was definitely a divine orchestration at play. It seems like it's just beyond comprehension, and maybe that's part of the mystery of life. Is how is this all happening, and how is it all happening just so silently and so beautifully, and inside all of us. It's really really amazing. You talked about the microbiome a little bit there, so I'd like to maybe switch gears and talk about that a little bit more. I know that if probably the last 10 years, the microbiome started to gain a lot of popularity. And sometimes the the deeper I go down these rabbit holes, I realize the less and less I know. So what do we know for certain about the microbiome, and what are some things we can hang our hat on in terms of gut health and microbiome health that can be beneficial for our listeners today?
Well, it's really funny how long it takes for science to catch up. I believe it was 1908 was the first article published about the microbiome by Eli Metchnov.
Hmm.
And so we're over 100 years later, and it's kind of caught on. It took us 30 years for hand washing to catch on with Ignaz Semmelweis's invention, right? We talk about how new it is, but the reality is, and then you talk about death begins in the bowels. I mean, weren't people saying that over in India, maybe 2500 BC, maybe? So it's really funny how sometimes the new thing is just a better understanding of old stuff. But our gut microbiome is this interesting thing we know from animal studies with these things called nude mice. They're mice that are genetically modified to have they have no immune system, and they actually um, will sterilize them and they remove all the bacteria and they get all these weird cancers and tumors. They get dysregulation of their immune system. And one of the things we've learned about the gut microbiome, it trains your immune system to ignore 99.9% of stuff in your environment, which is important. You want your immune system to ignore, grass, weed, dairy, peanuts. You want to kill, COVID virus, flu virus, whatever's going on. And so that microbiome becomes this tuning thing for our immune system, 80% of what is in our GI tract, but it also performs a huge detoxification process in our bodies. 50% of our pharmaceutical drugs are actually detoxified through our gut microbiome, which is the reason why some people have radically different drug reactions. Serotonin, 90% of serotonin is made in your GI tract. 75% of most neurotransmitters are made in your GI tract. So all of a sudden, this gut microbiome is playing an important role of brain function, detoxification, and it's as metabolically active as your liver. Can you live without your liver? No, right? And so all of a sudden the gut microbiome, and then it's also a metabolic factory for short chain fatty acids, metabolic byproducts, butyrate, which is like all the rage these days, um, protects your brain, actually helps heal leaky gut. Butyrate is nature's GLP-1. So if you heard about Onglyza and Victoza and Wegovy and all these GLP-1 craze right now for weight loss, butyrate's nature's GLP-1 your gut naturally makes. It also helps protect your brain against inflammation. So if you're a kid with low butyrate production, you're more prone to brain inflammation like in autism or in pandas, or if you're an older adult to dementia because you're losing that brain protective effect from butyrate. So all of a sudden, this microbiome, and we're just touching the cusp of what it does. And so things you can do for it. One, stop giving it antibiotics. Stop eradicating it, stop resetting it. 80% of all antibiotic usage in the United States is an agribusiness. It's stuff fed to chickens, stuff fed to cows. I remember reading this statistic maybe 20 years ago that there's about 50 micrograms of doxycycline equivalents in a cup of milk. So if you're going to consume dairy, is it grass fed, grass finished, A2, or is it state or stuff? So just eat real food that doesn't have antibiotics and chemicals in it. Glyphosate and Roundup, which people are familiar with how bad that is for us, but it actually got its patent as it blocks the shikimate pathway, which it won't hurt humans. It kills bacteria. Mm-hmm. Literally, it's a toxin for bacteria, which is how it works. So all of a sudden, it's like, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't be putting this in my food system. So how do you get a healthy microbiome? You just eat real food. You focus on stuff that feeds it, remove inflammatory foods, remove rancid fake orals. It's really interesting how the magic to your microbiome is it comes from your environment. So if you go in your backyard and pull some vegetables out of if you're a pregnant mom with a kid, you're breastfeeding or whatnot, you go in the backyard, pull some vegetables out of your garden. You'll have bacteria on the soil that get in the plant. You eat the plant. You'll actually excrete small amounts of those bacteria in your breast milk. All of a sudden, these bacteria you get in our food locally actually set up our gut microbiome that it's interesting. It actually will make different short chain fatty acids, different nutrients based on where you're living out in the world. So all of a sudden, just eating locally, eating real food, and then fasting. Fasting is another basic reset for our microbiome. It's really interesting how whether you do different kinds of fasts, so you do carnivore, different some of the fads that are out there. Part of the way they work is they are fasting what you've been growing in your gut that's bad for you. So all of a sudden, just giving your gut a rest, fasting, having, it's all this new cutting edge data on 24, 48, 32-hour fasts, how they improve mitochondrial function, how they kill senescent cells, which are zombie bad cells, how they actually improve detoxification of your brain. Like, so all of a sudden, like, the newest superfood, my joke is newest superfood is fasting, right? And so, and doing it the right way, with the right kind of food, and all of a sudden that's going to change your gut microbiome in a massive, massive way. If you do it intelligently and kind of listen to your body, everybody needs different stuff based on ethnicity, based on where you live in the world, based on physical stressors. If you're hypermobile, you need more protein and more trace minerals. There's a bunch of nuances to it, but that's like the basic concept that anybody anywhere can do.
Thank you. I'd love to maybe backtrack a few paragraphs there. You talked about GLP-1s, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. I don't know if you're seeing clients coming in who use GLP-1s, which if you have any experience with them,
Yeah.
they seem to be all the rage. And then, everything comes in cycles, and there's just seems to be one hot item, and then
Yeah.
it runs its course, and then something else comes along. But I'm just curious from your perspective if you've got any additional opinion on them.
Yeah. I've been using the medications in my medical practice since 2006 to 2007, and I actually did some original research with my research company on them for cardiovascular, for heart protection effects. They're a great drug, super powerful if used in the right way. And that's the key. We first found out, hey, we can use this to help improve insulin resistance, which is, a big issue. It actually helps people get satisfied better. So as Americans, we're not engorging ourselves all the way. It actually affects GI transit. What we didn't know is the anti-inflammatory effects. Actually, they're looking at research now as a neuroprotectant for patients with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And there's a lot of interesting stuff with it as an anti-inflammatory with people with fatty liver disease. There's some interesting research with it. With the new term now is MASH, metabolic associated steatohepatitis. We always have to change names, right? We change NASH to MASH or whatever. Um, as a powerful tool, and in my world, in the mast cell activation syndrome world, um, chronic Lyme mold, whatever world, we're seeing that microdosing of it can actually help stabilize mast cells.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure how familiar you are, Sachin, with mast cell activation or mast cell stuff or histamine stuff, if you're familiar with that at all. But it's according to research from Germany, 19% of the population, it's Dr. Boldering's research, has mast cell in Germany, which so means it's common here. So GLP-1s hit all of those things. So they're a really powerful drug that in the right situations can be powerful. But like anything, you can use something for good, for bad. And when all of
Hmm.
a sudden now it became popular, it wasn't being dosed the right way. You could buy it online. You could take a huge amount. If you're someone who has gastroparesis or like a slow stomach emptying with lots of reflux and constipation, it might give you intestinal obstruction. If you're someone who has mood regulation issues, it might put you into panic disorder, anxiety. So all of a sudden, this thing your body naturally makes that has health benefits, you're reading about some of the negative consequences. So I think it's a lot of things where the right situation can be very powerful. I've had patients come to me to want to get a pre-op clearance for gastric bypass surgery. I've literally prevented that by the GLP-1s actually work almost as good as a gastric sleeve for weight loss. So it's kind of like, abdominal surgery for weight loss or GLP-1, like, hey, and I've had multiple patients avoid that kind of surgery. I think what gets tricky is where you get people that are healthy who could do better on basic lifestyle stuff, who could use some probiotics, use some butyrate, use some dietary things. Or like, no, I want to up level it, who get into trouble with it. And so that's where, my clinical experience, I've used it for, this stage, over not quite 20 years of my career and with thousands of patients and had some really good results. I'm not having the bad side effects you hear about online, but I think it's like being used in the wrong hands with the wrong patients in excess, which is like anything, right?
Yeah, it seems like it's, many people are having issues maybe using it, um, not quite off label, but they could, like you said, probably be better served, or at least start making some of the lifestyle changes on their own. And this could be used in addition to that, if necessary, if those things
Yeah.
are failing them.
One of the big things that in the weight loss world we've known forever is that if you lose weight too fast, it's a detox issue, right? You store fats and you store fat soluble toxins in your fat tissue. If you lose, 4 or 5 pounds in a week, if you lose 20 pounds in a month, which some people will, you're offloading all these toxins. And it's been common knowledge for decades that you can actually increase your risk for gallstones and a gallbladder inflammation, need a gallbladder removal if you lose weight too fast. Because you make all these more gallstones, you get gallbladder sludging because your liver can't handle like the amount of stuff you're detoxifying. So slow it down, but people like push it too fast and you get these issues. And then unfortunately, a lot of Americans are toxic and they lose weight too fast. Like, are you eating the right diet in the first place? Are you getting plenty of fluids, electrolytes? Are you getting a healthy diet that helps improve detoxification with which could be binders as well? And I think that's where people get into trouble with these things. And then you have side effects. And that's where I think understanding how they work, using them in the appropriate situation, and then you have some people, no, I'm sorry, the one thing concept was also if you lose weight too fast, you'll lose muscle mass.
Mm.
And in the last year, like Ozempic face or whatever has come up on social media. I'm like, I've known about that for like almost 20 years, like in just
Mhm.
regular weight loss, right? And you can use other peptides like BPC 157 to prevent the muscle mass loss. And when I do that, that's kind of what I do. But that's where just healthy weight loss is 1 or 2 pounds a week, 48 pounds a month. in someone who's doing appropriate exercise, muscle building exercise, hit some kind of isotonic contraction, whatever, to build muscle mass or maintain it while you're losing weight. And that's what a lot of people don't focus on. And they say, oh, I lost so much weight. And it's like, you look in people's faces and be like, yeah, you've lost muscle too.
Mm. You know, muscles are now referred to as, the I think putting on muscle, lifting weights, has become a whole new. It's almost like it's gained this whole new resurgence, especially amongst women. And so I love seeing more women working out, lifting weights. It almost like there was a period of time where women were not afraid, but many of them didn't lift weights. So I'm so grateful to see that. I'm curious, kind of shifting gears again, how hormones play a role in all of this. So, hormones like cortisol, like thyroid, talked about insulin a little bit, sex hormones. How do they play a role in our metabolic health and wellness?
A huge role. I mean, that's a question I could ramble on for hours on end. I mean, you have like this thing called the hormonal hierarchy, right? Cortisol, insulin, and thyroid hormone. Those are your life essential hormones without which you die. Um, cortisol's, there's two hormones that go up as you age, insulin and cortisol. Everything else tends to go down, whether it's thyroid or sex hormones, which are downward on the hormonal hierarchy. But they actually are part of the way your metabolism expresses itself in different tissues is through these hormonal regulators. And you have peptides, which are hormones are long amino acids, 50, 60 plus amino acids, and peptides are shorter ones. So they actually work together in a very nice um, symphony, so to speak. But you have to have those things to be optimized. And optimized doesn't always mean as high as possible, which again, that's where people get in stuff. And the other thing is people don't realize that a lot of these things like T4 is converted to T3, like half of it that happened, 25% of the 30% that happens in your gut microbiome. Now we understand that appropriate gut function is super critical for these series one life essential hormones. Then the icing on the cake is your sex hormones, which again, it's really funny, men and women, right? Like we're opposites in the same in many ways. Like the primary memory hormone for men is estrogen. The primary memory hormone for women is testosterone, but we need both. Like for women, for higher critical thinking, like the more nuanced stuff, like multitasking, estrogen is important for them. Men testosterone for that, but we need it in different numbers. DHEA is a powerful hormone for memory. Pregnenolone, no one talks about pregnenolone, which is your primary memory hormone,
Mm.
which almost all my patients, they're over 50 when I check it, their levels are low. And all of a sudden you have this hierarchy and you need adequate cholesterol to make the sex hormones. You need adequate vitamin C to make cortisol. You need adequate um, um, tyrosine tryptophan to make your thyroid hormone. You need adequate iodine for function. So all of a sudden, nutrition plays into this. But your metabolism is not going to work the right way if your hormones are not balanced. And so I like the word hormone optimization therapy because many of my patients, I can get the hormones balanced without giving them testosterone, without giving them thyroid. If you kind of look at what's going on, um, but the thing to do is, hey, your thyroid's low. Let's give you some thyroid medication. We'll give you a T4, not something compounded. Your T's low. Let's just give you some T shots. It's like, well, why is it low? Is it primary or
Mhm.
secondary? Is this from your sleep apnea and metabolic? Low testosterone is part of metabolic syndrome, right? Beginning. So if your T's off, we need to address that. Women, same thing. And so all of a sudden, these things are super critical. But if you don't understand how they interplay, and you say, I'm a thyroid expert or I'm a testosterone expert, whatever it is, and you don't realize this is a big symphony and you need every part of the symphony. I see a lot of, I get a lot of patients actually come to me, their levels are all jacked up because they're treated symptomatically and they weren't, and all these things, their interconnections weren't looked at, but they're super, to your point, all these things to be balanced. It has to be balanced. It has to be balanced.
Yeah, it's so important. I remember a few years ago, I got an email from somebody and he's on testosterone replacement therapy and asking questions about how do I bring my testosterone levels up, and I gave him a list of all these lifestyle factors to do, and I never heard back from him. So some people want to take the easy route, but what we have to realize is that if your testosterone is low or any hormone is low, chances are other hormones are going to be imbalanced as well, and you can't treat these things myopically and just artificially raise one without recognizing that there's a whole symphony, as you mentioned, that there's probably a whole bunch of other things that need to be addressed, and they could be simple things. They don't have to be complicated,
Yeah.
but looking at the person as a whole and not just as one lab value and treating that, I think is really important.
I mean, it's really interesting. If your cortisol's high, you'll have insulin resistance and develop thyroid resistance. If your thyroid's not optimal, and those aren't optimal, that's going to affect basically your metabolism, which, thyroid's one of the primary metabolism hormones that affects mitochondrial function. Then all of a sudden, even if you have adequate sex hormones and they get to the receptor sites, they won't create the same amount of effect because everything else is off. And
Mm.
so you might have someone come with, I'm having cycle irregularities or I have fertility problems or, I've got low T or whatever, depending on it's a male or female. And like the issue is not you need more sex hormones. The issue is you need these other nutrient deficiencies and you need these basic core um, hormones essential for life. You need those, level one, system one, you need those addressed.
So paint us a picture, if you would, Aaron. What would it be like if somebody came to see you or somebody called your office? First of all, I'm curious: do you work with people remotely? Is it in person mainly? In certain states that you work with them?
Yeah, I have brick and mortar. That's what I've done forever. And because I'm a licensed medical doctor, it requires you having licensing. We're working on licensure actually in Arizona right now because I'm looking at doing a precision medicine clinic, which would be a would allow me to maximally practice this kind of medicine. But you apply, we have an application process. And it's looking for a fit. Like if you're not ready for this kind, because this kind of medicine, people want to come in. It's like, have you changed your diet yet? Have you changed your lifestyle? What's your environment look like? Are you in healthy relationships? Like all the basic foundational stuff. Like if you're not ready to change that and you're not to reinvest, like me giving you a ton of supplements and a ton of other fancy cool gadgets isn't gonna, it's not gonna be maximally beneficial. So we have an application process. Um, and then you have to fill out, we have like a 20-page intake form that usually takes a couple hours to fill out. And then when people come and see us in person, I have two other practitioners that work in the practice, and we're looking at hiring a third and a fourth in the next year. They go through all that stuff with you and figure out an individualized plan for you that then over the next year you have to go through. We have a membership model because it's an investment on your part.
Hmm.
You're investing your time, your efforts, your money, and it's an investment for me. So I want us to both be on the same page. And the reality with this kind of medicine, it's not you come in for a clinic visit and then I fall back up with you when I want in 6 months or a year. You really have to like work at the process out. So we usually see people every 3 months, and we have coaching visits as well for the first year. And then with our new thing, our precision medicine, we're actually going to up level that high functioning individuals who want to actually take the next step. And it's going to enable me to take the totality of what I've learned over the last 25 years and actually be more focused with those individuals like I have been with my daughter, but doing that for a group of people who want that kind of level of stuff. But yeah, all of my resources, we actually have a whole description of how our process works and walks people through that on our website at richmondfunctionalmedicine.com, which if people are interested in that, they can look at that. We've actually created our website as a hub for information. So just if people want, we have over 300 blog posts. I've read like 400 or 500 books. We have a recommended book reading list on there for people to learn. So it's like my educational hub per se.
Yeah, it's a plethora of resources there. So check those out. And certainly somebody who wants to take that next step is ready to make that commitment, then I think might be worth an application, right? Especially if they tried a bunch of things and they don't seem to be working. Certainly, you've got a lot of valuable knowledge and information, and I'm so glad that your business is expanding and you're imparting this knowledge on other doctors and clinicians that can help more people. And I'm super excited for this clinic in Arizona. Is it going to be in Scottsdale?
Yeah, we're actually Becky, my wife Becky. She's official title is director of innovation, I think, innovations director. But anyway, it's going to basically be like more of like a pop up where people can do like an intake, and then they would this kind of medicine. Like I need to see people. I need to lay my hands on you. I need to do people forget how important a physical exam is.
Hmm.
They forget how important doing a good neurological exam is for actually figuring out what's going on with someone's body. It's not just hearing your story and doing a bunch of fancy tests. And so I still need that ability. So we're looking at potentially having that set up in areas in the Phoenix Scottsdale area. And we're doing intakes and then we just do the follow up virtually. I would just need to see the person once a year. Um, Ideally in my Virginia location, but we're still hashing the details out. Hopefully be launched in the next 3 to 6 months plus or minus. Once we get set up, we have a few people who asked us for it. We actually are creating for some people who asked for it. And so we'll invite them in and kind of run it through to make sure everything's working appropriately. Because you know how it works, right?
Yeah, well,
Like
I know
something new,
we're both in Phoenix often for Genius Network
you know.
and other masterminds and things that we belong to. So yeah, when it's up and running, let me know. I'd love to come check it out and continue to support that the work that you're doing and Becky are doing together. Um, any final words that you'd like to share? I mean, we could probably talk. We should do a whole series because there's so much that I know you want to share and can share. But I'm curious if there's any final words on anything that we talked about today that you'd like to impart on us.
I think the biggest thing is people need to keep the main thing. There's always, like you mentioned, the GLP-1s. There's always a shiny new gadget, a new fancy diet, something cool that helps or help this person amazingly. But ultimately, what is time proven that's been working for people ever since the beginnings of Ayurvedic medicine and Western medicine with Hippocrates. These basic things people focus on. Gut health, stress, sleep, meaning and value, having a purpose in life. Um, these things are I don't want to underestimate how powerful they by themselves can be. So when people are trying to figure out how can I help myself, it's like you got to make the main thing the main thing. The foundations is still the foundation. If you have a really cool structure and the foundation's horrible, it looks cool for a while until the foundation falls down. So my thing is, and having had over 100,000 patient encounters in my 25-year career, it's I've proven in person, like, yeah, you need to do the main thing, which is diet, exercise, sleep, having a sense of purpose and meaning. It's amazing how much just knowing there's a purpose to your life can actually make the difference between surviving concentration camp during the Holocaust or not.
Mm,
Not your ethnicity, not your place in society, not how much money you had to like literally drive a reason to actually live. Um, and so these are like the core things I think people want to jump over to get to the cool fancy stuff that I just want to reiterate. You got to do the base. It's like you're a professional athlete. I was at church, years, and all the pastors there were used to be professional soccer players, and I'm like, so what? And just having interesting conversations. Like, I just got really good. We just perfected the basics.
mm,
I remember when I wrestled in high school. My wrestling coach, he was like national champion for VMI, Virginia Military Institute, and he was like, I can roll you no matter where you're at, anytime, anywhere. He'd play with us as kids. He'd be like, I'm going to roll you, Hartman. I'm going to roll you. I'm like, you're not even touching me. I'm on my back, right? He perfected one thing. He's a national champion, right? And so it's like, perfect the basics. That's how you get to like, and then if you add the cool stuff on, that's when the magic happens. That's when you're like, oh my gosh, this, with my daughter, that's when someone who's never supposed to walk, talk, or crawl, who's never supposed to talk, or be anything is like living the life of her dreams. My wife and I went to, I shouldn't say this in public, but she went to see her favorite Taylor Swift concert, the last thing of the Eras tour. She was like screaming her head off, it's like screaming, singing, having a great time. It's like we were told that wasn't supposed to be possible, and so it's like you can see amazing things, but it's built on the basics, the foundations.
mm. Well, I'm getting goosebumps just hearing you say that. So I'm so happy for you and the family and her especially. Michael Jordan starts every practice or did start every practice with a chest pass. And I have to remind my son that because he loves basketball and he'll get on the court and he'll start shooting 3 pointers. And I'm like, dude, you got to start with the foundation. So this is
Yep.
a perfect message, even when it comes to health, that we got to start with the foundation. And then it's easier to build our house with a strong foundation versus a house on sand. So once
Absolutely.
again, thank you, Dr. Aaron Hartman. This is so enlightening. So grateful we got to spend this time together. So excited to share this with our community. And please, everyone, check out his website, check out the work that they're doing. And there's so much to learn. He has so much value to offer. And for those of you that are ready for that calling and you need the help, you've got a complex case and you feel like you've kind of tried everything and you're first doing the basics, then pay their clinic a visit, apply and see if this is the right next step for you. And if it is, I know you're in great hands. So once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Lots of love, so much gratitude. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again here shortly.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Sachin. And thanks for the invite. I'm really enjoyed it. And hopefully this will be helpful to your community.
Thank you.